We've all seen the Evo front covers with the rear hanging out, tyres smoking, those Top Gear clips with the car right on the limit, and now it's my turn to learn how to drift. Yeah, so I thought it wise to practice in the simulator first, so I'm here in Assetto Corsa in the McLaren 12C, and if you've seen my simulator tour, you'll notice that I've changed the steering wheel to a round one, and I'm currently using a sequential shifter. The reason why I can't drift is very simple. All the racing I've done, so the track days in my GR Yaris when I was karting, testing in Formula 4, I've always had my hands firmly locked in at the 10 to 2 position, as some people like to call it. I've never had to move my hands. Any slide that falls within the range where I don't have to move my hands is absolutely fine. I have no issue catching that whatsoever. The issue comes when I have to release my hands from the steering wheel, whether it's feeding it, whether it's a complete release. See, car control, as you see, is not the issue. The issue is I get confused with where the wheel is. There are a couple of methods that I'm going to try today, and I'm going to talk you through what I learn as I'm doing them, and then later on in the video I'll break down what I believe the 5 steps to drifting are, and I'll give you some top tips at the end as well. I thought it would be interesting for you to see where I go wrong, the common pitfalls which I'm sure I'm going to fall into, and then give me some advice down in the comments. What did you like about my technique at the end, what didn't you? Here we go, Nürburgring GP, coming up to a nice long corner. I'm going to try feeding it to correct it. I'll take that as an attempt. What I'm doing here is I'm kicking the back out and then I'm feeding the wheel like this to try and correct it. I lifted off the throttle too sharply there. Showing some promise. I've spent some time now with the technique where I'm kicking the back out, and then to correct the slide initially I'm feeding the wheel like this, and it's not really working. It's too slow a method of correction. Now I'm going to try what not only looks cooler but I see more people doing, which is the old release method. So okay, showed some promise. So what people do, they'll come into the corner, kick the back out, then they allow the slide to correct itself. A bit like that. That was actually quite a good attempt. Okay, there I lifted off too sharply after the initial kick, and I'll talk more about the techniques that I'm learning later on when I see the steps. I want to learn to drift because it looks bloody cool, and what do you see on the front cover of an Evo magazine, of a Top Gear, of a thumbnail of a video? You see someone smoking about, you see someone drifting, and that's what I want to be able to do. So this is in a way my practice audition for Evo, shall we say. So that's my aim. So a mistake I'm starting to realise that I'm making a lot is lifting off the throttle too sharply. So coming into the corner, I'm turning in and then I'm giving the throttle a big boot in order to get the back of the car out, because at the moment I'm in a high powered car. But then after that phase, to then correct the slide or sort of bring it into equilibrium in order to hold it around the corner, the issue that I'm having is I'm lifting off the throttle too sharply, shifting all the weight to the front, and then that means the front suddenly grips and ping, you go back the other way. So what I'm going to try and do is lift off only to half, which worked then. That looked quite good. Not a lot of angle, but that shows that you need to keep the car really balanced. The only time you're actually unbalancing the car is that initial wiggle where it might be a Scandi flick like that, but the rest of the time you need the car to sit in an equilibrium of sorts. So So now spending some time with this technique of releasing the wheel to correct it, what I'm finding is that it is not a complete release of the wheel like that, and then you grab it again, because that's never going to work. What I found myself doing instead is not a complete release, but letting it feed through my hands, letting it slide, and then I can choose to restrict or allow the motion like this. So I loosen my grip, allow the wheel to travel to where it wants to, then I tighten my grip, either stop it or slow down its motion, and it's just a really good way of controlling the steering smoothly without a jerking motion, because everything has to be smooth. It's quite hard doing this because I'm trying to pick up on my mistakes, which is, it's hard to critique yourself. So what I've noticed I'm doing is I've developed a technique where I leave my hands in the same position. What I mean by that is I turn in and then I just release the wheel with my hands in that position. I just let the wheel move freely. I do my turning, then I just release, grab, until it finds the balance point, and that's a technique that I've developed and seems to be working. Well, you can be the judge of if it's working. I think it's working now. So now I can kick the back out and do that initial correction. That's fine. So now what I need to work on is the next phase, which is maintaining the slide around the corner. And that comes from a strong connection between the throttle and your hands. And what I mean by that is you're controlling the angle is basically your objective. And I'll talk much more technically about why that is when I go through the steps of a drift later on. Now there's the final step, which is bringing the car back to a straight, bringing it out of the drift. And here you cannot use the release the wheel technique. You do have to feed it, and that is because you need to know which way the wheel is pointing. Going into the slide, in a way, it doesn't matter if you've got 90 degrees of lock on, 270 degrees of lock on, whatever, because it will just find its point, he says, spinning. But on the way out of the slide, you need to know that when you lift off the throttle and ease it into a straight line, that your wheel is truly pointing straight, so that you don't either induce another slide or ping, pendulum back the other way. So the way to do this is to ease off the throttle when you want to finish your slide, and I use those words very carefully of when you want to finish your slide, because you have to dictate when that time is. You can't allow the car to say, oh, the slide's over now, and then you panic to get it back in a straight line, because that's when you're most likely to crash. You need to dictate the moment when you're like, okay, I'm gonna ease off the throttle, I'm gonna shift some weight to the front end in order to basically bring the steering into focus, make the front wheels dictate the motion of the car, not the rear wheels spinning up. So you lift off the throttle a bit, you begin to unwind the steering, and I find actually that I sort of force the steering to unwind before I even lift off the throttle, because otherwise it can be a bit too extreme, it can flick out on me. So that's just the way I do it, but it's one of those things that you find a balance and you will pick it up. I mean, I've learnt the most by just driving and doing laps. But anyway, once you've eased off the throttle and the car begins to come back around, it's at that point that you want to get back on the throttle, because if you just lift off the throttle and stay off of it, then it's going to continue to swing back the other way. It's going to do it quickly, and if you do manage to keep the car in a straight line, it's going to do that sort of wiggle that you see, where it gets to a straight line, it snaps there, it sort of stops suddenly, and really you want to have a flowing end to your drift. You don't want it to be like, right, drift over, I'm going straight. No, you want to have a nice smooth ending, because not only is that when you're least likely to crash, it looks the best. And I'd even say you're better off to go slightly back the other way, drifting, but doing it in a smooth and controlled manner, than trying to instantly snap back to straight. Now, the next thing I'm going to do while learning how to drift is I'm going to change track and car, because what I don't want to happen is the techniques that I'm developing now to become very car and track specific. So it becomes muscle memory, it becomes this is how you blip this car, this is how you correct this car, because then I'm sort of learning exactly this. I'm not learning how to drift as a whole. So I'm going to pick a different car, and then with that car, which I also believe is slightly easier to drift at a different track, I'm going to try and do a complete lap sideways. Other than the straight bits, I'm not that good yet. So the track I've chosen is Silverstone GP, and the car is a Mercedes SLS. And the reason for that is it's got no turbo and it's got lovely power all the way through the rev range, and that makes it easier than a turbo car such as the 12C I was just in. Really, you need something with good power all the way through the rev range, and ideally naturally aspirated, long wheelbase, and I seem pretty much to just be describing. The Mercedes AMG SLS. I'm quite pleased with that slide. Yeah, this is easier. I'm having fun. This is much easier. I'm pleased I learned in a harder car to drive, and I'll definitely come back to it to refine my technique. Because what you don't want is a car that's going to wipe your bottom when it comes to poor technique, because then you're not really learning, you're in a way cheating. But this is good fun. This is really good fun. Now I'm going to try and link a whole lap together and put everything that I've learned into practice. And what I've learned is quite a lot. This is such a different discipline to race driving, because you've just got to be so much more fluid, so much happier with the car moving underneath you. And yes, when you're racing, cars do slide, and that is often quickest, but when we talk about driving a car on yaw, we mean 5-10 degrees, not 45-50. As I try and finish this lap, I'll put the replay in the background. I'll throw you to Other Will, who will talk about the 5 stages of a drift and give you my 3 top tips at the end. If you've enjoyed the video so far, please like and subscribe, it helps me out a lot. So what did I learn? Let's get technical for a minute. I'll break down the 5 steps to a good drift, and I'll give you my 3 top tips at the end. Step 1 is braking traction. It's getting sideways, and to do that it depends very much on how much power you have in your car. For a high powered car, and I'm talking rear wheel drive for all of this, what you're going to do is you're going to turn into the corner, then give a stab on the gas or throttle if you're European, or accelerator, whatever, the loud pedal on the right, and then what that's going to do is spin the tyres up, they're going to break traction, and then because you've steered in, the rear is going to step out because it's under load, and then it breaks traction and the rear swings out further because it can no longer cope with the load. So that is step 1 in a highly powered car. If you're in a low powered car, then you might need to work a bit harder. You may need to trail brake in to transfer the weight to the front and take it away from the back. What that means is that when you then turn in, the rear might break away on its own, or at least it's more ready to break away when you step on the throttle. And that is step 1. Easy. Now step 2 is what I'm calling the first catch, the point at which after you've got sideways you're trying to immediately find that equilibrium position, so you're really quickly correcting the slide or finding a neutral balance. The way to do this is smoothly, and that is with the steering and with the throttle. A mistake I made earlier on, as you saw, was after that initial kick of the pedal to get the back out, I came off the throttle completely, and what that means is weight transfer suddenly to the front and ping, I go back the other way. So what I did once I'd learned how to do it properly was do that kick to get the back out, and then only come off to halfway, because that's a good balance. And when I'm doing that, I'm not going from flat out suddenly to half. I'm doing my kick and then rolling off gently to half power, and then I'm starting to find the balance. So that's what you're doing with your feet with the throttle pedal. So what the hell do you do with your hands? Well, not that much. I found myself leaving my hands in the exact same position, turning in and leaving them there. The difference being that I'm releasing my grip. I let the car catch itself, but of course not entirely, because then you eliminate the drift. So I release my grip, allow the wheel to slide through my hands, then I gently tighten the grip again, and then you balance the car. And this needs to be done in conjunction with what you're doing with the throttle pedal. So as you ease off the power and find that neutral position with the pedal, you also need to ease off the steering and find that neutral position with the steering. And that brings me on to step 3. And this is the bit that looks the coolest. This is maintaining the slide for as long as you can. And you have one main priority, and that is making sure that your hands and your feet are talking to each other. Now, the basic rule for both of them, as I keep saying, but it is the most important one, is no jerking motions. As you're correcting the slide, do it slowly. As you're easing off the throttle, easing back on because you don't have enough angle or you've got too much, just do everything smoothly and make sure that more throttle, more steering correction at the same time. Once you're in that slide, you want to maintain it. You don't want to be correcting mistakes you've made. You don't want to give it more angle, then have to suddenly correct it. You want to know that you're going to do that, plan for it, and account for it immediately in your steering input. Now, it's at this stage as well that you'll see drift pros following a racing line, a racing drift line. But this technique is for another day. At the moment, all we want to do is hold the slide in that fragile equilibrium that is drifting. Now, step 4 is unwinding the steering. This is when you want to bring the car out of the slide. And this you don't do by releasing the wheel, because that's far too uncontrolled. And as you'll often see when people correct a slide, it can sort of get into a bit of a fishtail. It can be sometimes quite a violent snap back to straight. And if you've released your grip on the wheel, you're not going to be able to catch it. It's going to ping one way or another. So what I found myself doing is, as I really slowly start to bring the steering back to straight, and it's important to know which way your wheel is pointed. I mean, generally you'll figure it out as you sort of feel, as you wind it, you'll feel the notches, you might feel some buttons, but you need to know where the wheel is pointing and what is straight, so you know how far you have to go. And just as you start unwinding the steering, you're going to ease off the throttle, transfer the weight to the front, and give the front wheels some power in the equation. Actually make the car go where the front wheels are pointing by giving them extra grip. And this brings me on to step 5, which is the last bit before you're pointed dead straight. So step 4, you've started to unwind the steering, you're easing off the throttle, you're giving the front wheels some weight, ready to go where the front wheels are pointing. Step 5, you get back on the power. Now, why do you do that? Well, if you don't, you're going to overload the front tyres, and while the rear is still sliding, it's likely to snap back to that straight position, like I was talking about when you see people sliding and then they hit a harsh stop when the slide finishes. What you want to do is come out of the slide smoothly, because not only does it look coolest, it's the easiest to control. So you get back on the power just as you're nearly straight, and that will give it a smooth return back to neutral, back to facing forward. It's perfectly fine to go back the other way, so you're drifting around a right-hander like that, and then as you bring it out, it goes slightly to the left, and then you gently find straight. That's much better than sliding like this and then going bang straight, because that's much more likely to go wrong in a way that you cannot correct. So those are the 5 fundamental stages to a drift. And now for my top 3 tips. Tip 1. Loosen your grip on the wheel. If you have a rigid grip and you're trying to do these sort of staccato movements, the car is going to be unsettled. You need to allow the wheel to flow through your hand to then stop it, but stop it in a mannered way, and even mid-slide when you're holding it in that equilibrium position during stage 3. You need to be prepared to again loosen your grip. It might go further than you expect, but at no point would I be, say, hooking my thumbs over the steering wheel at 10 to 2, because you might need to release it suddenly, you might need to let it spin, and that's all part of it. So tip 1 is have a very loose grip. Loose, but still in control. Tip number 2, the throttle is not an on and off switch. When you give it a boot to get the wheels to spin up and get the car to step out, that may not be flat out, that may be half throttle. It depends so much on the car. And when you ease off to get some more weight to the front to control the slide, you're not coming all the way off. It might be 20%, 30%, but that's something you need to feel. But it can feel quite counterintuitive to give it a kick and then not come all the way off. But you've just got to ease off, ease back on. The throttle is not an on-off switch. And the final tip, tip number 3, is relax. Allow the car to move. Cars will always choose the path of least resistance, which is why you have the ability to release the wheel and then grab it again, because it's going to correct itself, it sorts itself out. So when you're relaxed and when you're smooth on the controls, all of them, then generally you'll be alright. Rather than manhandling the car, you're just giving it nudges in the right direction. As usual, if you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to see more content like this.